Hello and welcome to the first in this series, what I did to grow my business in the first 2 years. Every single thing I talk about would work just as well for me if I started today. What I'm sharing here is the things that stand out most in my mind, the really key events, and also those places where I can share lessons with you or little stories that you might find reassuring. So let's jump in. So I'm going to start with my first year in business. And as you'll know, if you're familiar with my Business from the Heart pathway, my journey in that first year was very typical of the journey that most of us take. So I had actually registered my business in the previous October, and I'd made some attempts to get started, but I was struggling really badly. I had very severe chronic health issues. I also wasn't that confident. I had a raft of qualifications. I had my nutritional therapy postgraduate. I had yoga teacher certificate, NLP practitioner, NLP coach, and finally my life coaching training. All of those qualifications, I had absolutely no confidence at all. And I knew nothing about running a business. I knew nothing about getting clients. I knew nothing about how to price. The only thing I had was 17 years background of a career in sales. As it turned out, my experience in sales was a huge asset, even though I didn't have any of the other pieces. Now, before I get into things, it's worth mentioning pre-business, because before I came to this business, I had spent many, many years seeking, what is it I'm going to do with my life? Within that time, because I was seeking, I went to a lot of events. I went to lots of training courses. So every NLP course I did, the nutritional therapy course, a personal development course. So it was a very exciting time for me. I was immersing myself in these different worlds and I was learning. And what was actually happening was I was meeting lots and lots of very different people. What I didn't consciously realize I was doing was I was building connections. Those connections ended up playing into how I got my business started. And it's so easy to underestimate the relationships that we're building. So year one, what did I do in year one of my business? Well, first of all, I floundered around changing my niche and target market every single month as I realized that each one I chose didn't feel right. I wasted an enormous amount of time setting up new websites and new social media profiles every time. My lesson from all of this is if there's something in your business that you're only going to need to do once, then pay somebody to do it. Website is the perfect example. Unless you're planning to be a web designer, there's no point you learning how to design and build a website. You're better off putting your time and energy into things that will be long-term impact on your business and pay someone else to do those one-off project jobs. So the other thing that happened in that first year was I discovered what felt really heavy in terms of working with clients and what really lit me up. It was a real process, but it was what I needed to go through to get to where I am now. I didn't understand that at the time, but that would be one lesson I would take, is that I needed to go through that process of floundering around, trying to figure things out, because I wouldn't have got to where I am now otherwise. In that first year, I went to lots of networking and I told lots of people what I did, even though it sounded clumsy and I don't think I sounded very convinced. I was introducing myself as things like a business coach and a transformational life coach. And, I was all over the place really. But the thing is, I did get one-to-one clients in that first year. And I think that the lesson in that is that if you're doing your activity offline, a really clear niche and target market is a lot less important, because people will buy into you as a person. It's really when you shift to being online that you can't get away with being woolly or fluffy or vague or just sort of nice to have. I also knew that speaking could be good for my business, but I was absolutely terrified. So I started going to Toastmasters. And of course, when you go to Toastmasters, you get to give these short 5-minute talks. And sometimes you can stand up and give a 60-second introduction. So I always made sure that I mentioned what I was doing in my business every single time I stood up. And everybody present in the room knew that I was a coach and knew what I was doing. So the lesson there is to never miss out an opportunity to at least mention what you do, because you never know who's listening. And people would sometimes come up to me afterwards because they wanted to sell to me. But you know, it all leads somewhere. For example, I remember there was a social media expert there, and she clearly wanted to coach and teach me in social media. I didn't take her up on it. But later on, when I got clarity on my actual current niche of authentic sales, she then started to refer people to me. So all of those connections I was making paid off eventually, but it, you know, not always immediately. So, you know, every new contact is building your network. Every new relationship is potentially a really valuable one, even if they're not going to become a client. So be open to all of them. Finally, I settled on what I thought was a niche. It was good enough to get me going. And I started to really get a bit of traction with the message of women over 40 who are unfulfilled and want to make a change. I then started to advertise where I thought those sorts of women might see it. So I advertised on Gumtree and in the local yoga studios and in the local health food shops. Now, I wasn't charging a lot. I still wasn't very confident. Here's how unconfident I was when I started my business. My very first coaching client, I charged £60 for 6 sessions. So £10 per session. But you know what? The important thing was I got going. So with all of this said, by the end of that first year, I was still floundering. I was still lacking in confidence. I really hadn't made much money. I couldn't say that I was creating a business, but I was seeing clients and I learned a lot that year. But you know what? It was all a process. It was all a process that led me to where I am today. So finally came a turning point towards the end of the year. I signed up to work with a money coach. Her diagnosis was actually my relationship with money was good. I just hadn't yet figured out how I was going to actually make any. And she challenged me to go to the founder of the coaching school where I had trained and to propose to him that I run a one-day workshop for him called Sales Success for Coaches. Now, I was absolutely shaking in my boots, but to my absolute amazement, he actually said yes. And I remember he promoted it to his qualified coaches. He organised the training room, and after all the costs, we split the profit. I remember on that day being absolutely mortified and embarrassed to go along and to be teaching something that to me was just such common sense. And it was on that day that I realized, oh my gosh, this wasn't common sense at all. People don't know this stuff. And it was that day that Selling from the Heart was born, when I knew I am here to teach heart-centered business owners how to get clients in ways that feel authentic and comfortable. And that focus and that message hasn't changed in all of those years. And of course, everything I had done up until then, everything I had floundered with, everything I had experimented with, the relationships that I'd built, the fact that I had built a relationship with the founder of the coaching school while I was on his course, all of this started to pay off. Now, I knew now what I was doing in terms of a business focus, but I was still struggling. At that workshop, which was like the turning point, I came away from that with £240. So that wasn't enough to launch a business from. It was around about now, just after I got clarity on my sort of niche, that I joined my first mentoring program. I was still massively lacking in confidence. And so the next thing I did was I actually started working with people for free. So I took on one client for one-to-one sales coaching. I did one VIP day and I did one personal mentoring and critiquing of somebody's selling from webinars. Those were the 3 things that finally gave me the confidence that I knew what I was doing and I knew what I was talking about. And gave me 3 great testimonials. It was a really long and slow start, mainly because of my chronic health at the time. But what I started to do now, I started running more workshops. So the one thing that felt like it had worked well for me was that workshop I had done for the coaching school. So I decided to do more of the same. I did more workshops with the coaching school, and I did others with an acupuncture clinic and a therapy centre. They would promote to their mailing list. I would run it, and we would take 50-50 on the profits. And I would charge £47 for the whole day. Now, this is the exact same stuff that I teach in my course now for £1,000. So I guess there's a lesson in there as well. It can take a while to really understand our value and the value that we bring, and also the need for us as business owners to price in a way that is sustainable for our own lifestyle. And it's okay to start out charging less if that's what you need to do. If you need to charge a lower amount while you get going, it worked for me. However, the problem with having started at that level was that I wasn't making more than £250, £300 per workshop. So this wasn't adding up to anything that was going to allow me to go full time. And this is the thing about what I got from starting to invest in mentoring. The what you don't know. I actually had no idea that low-cost workshops was never going to be profitable. But if I had just made an offer on those days for one-to-one sales coaching, I could have been making £4,000 to £8,000 from each workshop. And if I had run a workshop once a month and I'd then come away from that with between 2 and 4 clients, I would have had a really solid business. And this is the thing. That's an example of why I talk about this with my membership, like you don't know what you don't know. So I had joined that mentoring program at the end of the previous year. But here's the thing. I was ignoring my mentor. Every single month for 7 months, she told me to turn that one-day workshop into an online course. And I didn't want to. I just didn't want an online course. For me, it was like, I don't want to be working online. And I don't want to have to do all that tech. No, like my instinct every step of the way was no, I don't want to do it. So I just didn't do it. And then one day I had a big turning point. I was still struggling. So here I am, I'm in a mentoring program. I'm ignoring the advice of my business mentor, but I'm still struggling. So what did I do? And who can relate to this? I went off and I went looking for a new mentor. And I went to a presentation with a new business mentor. And he actually said to me, your business is entertainment and it's not making a difference to anybody. People are coming to you, they're having a great day, they're going home with a notebook full. But he said, does anything actually change for them as a result? And that, I think, was when something clicked for me. And I sat down and I made a plan for the structure of turning that one-day workshop into an online course. Now, during this year, another thing happened to me, which was also as a result of relationships that I'd built. I started a meetup group for heart-centered business owners because I wanted a way that I could get my ideal audience together and build that network and, obviously use it to get clients. Once I had done that, because I got started, somebody who had a meetup group and didn't want to run it anymore gave me a meetup group. And I merged the two. I then would run a group every single month. I would bring in a speaker. At the beginning, I would stand up, I would introduce myself, I would say what I did, I would tell a little story or give a bit of advice. I would then introduce the speaker. There would also be networking. So everybody in the room knew who I was, knew what I did, and people would often come up and speak to me at the end to find out more about working with me. I also got to build relationships with the speakers and, we'd go for a drink afterwards, and those relationships also played a really big part in my business growth because I was building relationships with people with audiences, and many of them later, as I got more established, promoted me to their audience or invited me to do interviews on their platforms. So that was sort of the first half of the year. I was underestimating the fact that I was building relationships. If I could look back now, if I was being conscious about it, I could have said, right, I'm going to spend the first 6 months of this year building my foundation of relationships ready to grow from it. I didn't know that was what I was doing. It felt like I was still struggling to get this business to work and I couldn't see how to get it profitable. So, second half of the year, I had now created the outline of my online course. I think it was July. And I booked myself as a speaker for my own meetup event in August. I gave a talk. I made an offer. 13 of the people there bought it. I then ran a webinar. I was invited to give a talk at another small group. And I ended up with 20 people in my first group. I was very focused on launching this online course, but of course the very activity of doing what I needed to do to launch it was generating inquiries from one-to-one clients as well. So things were really starting to come together. And the autumn was then spent creating it and delivering it. So by the end of that second full year, I now had a mailing list of 300 people as a result of all of the promotion of all the little workshops I'd done in partnership with these smaller organizations, and the promotion I was doing to my meetup group. All of that created my own mailing list that I was absolutely terrified to actually email. I had an online course that was getting results for people. I had fantastic testimonials. I had new confidence because of the success of the online course. My one-to-one fees increased considerably to £2,000 for 6 months. And later on, that became £5,000 for 6 months. So all of that floundering around and following the breadcrumbs had sort of brought me to this place where what I had was some really key foundations as a launch pad to my success. So I knew I had something and I had all these foundations. But do you know what? I still hadn't made more than about £10,000 that year. So it was great. And things were happening, but it was not enough to give up my freelance role. I really needed to be bringing in £2,000 a month to be able to go full time in my business. And I wanted 4,000 in order to be able to move back to London. So I was in this place. Some of you will relate to this. I had something. I had an online course. I had happy clients. I had testimonials. And I still didn't have a business that I felt was really working. So that was my first 2 years. That was where I got to in my first 2 years of business. I spent the first year floundering. I was a general coach. I was experimenting and cycling through lots of different niches and specialisms, and all of the things that I learned gradually led me to the moment when I realized that actually it's heart-centered sales, and actually teaching the people who I had met so many of these people through everything I'd done, the nutritional therapists, the Reiki practitioners, the coaches, the healers, the small business owners. I'd sat shoulder to shoulder with them at events and conferences and courses. I knew about their struggles. I had been one myself for the whole of the past year. And it was that light bulb moment of this is what I'm here to do. And then the second year was really where I finally was able to turn that into action, mainly through workshops, which were not profitable because I didn't understand that I needed to sell something more expensive at them if I wanted to be profitable. Amazing that what we don't know, because some of these things are so obvious when you know, but if you don't know them, you just don't know them. And then, of course, taking that workshop, turning it into an online course and getting those first 20 people into it. So that's the end of the first 2 years. And I said this was about how I grew my business in the first 2 years. So I hope that you will find that valuable. And I hope you can take some inspiration from that. I hope you can also see that what I wasn't doing in my first 2 years was sitting alone at home with a computer, posting on social media every day and hoping that people would engage with me. I was very lucky because every mentor I worked with guided me away from it, really. So that was me by the end of the second year. I often look back at my business and people have often asked me, Catherine, what was the secret to your success? And I think there were two secrets, really. One was I had an absolute deep, deep determination that I was going to make this business work. I was done with meaningless, unfulfilling work. I wanted something that I felt passionate about. And I was so determined that I would almost do whatever it took. But the other thing was courage. Courage, as we know, is not the absence of fear. Courage is the ability to be absolutely so terrified that you can barely stand up and that you're sick to your stomach, and yet you can still go and do the thing. So that is my first 2 years. So like I said, I do hope you've been able to take some lessons from that to inspire you and to show you that there are lots of different ways to make a business work.